Here's a sentence that sounds insane. The invention of farming might have been the worst decision our species ever made. Not the best, the worst. And almost every human alive today is still living with the consequences. For 95% of our history, we weren't farmers. We were foragers. Small bands moving with the seasons, eating whatever the land handed us. No fields, no stored grain, no permanent address. Then, about 12,000 years ago, in a handful of separate places, the Fertile Crescent, parts of China, Mesoamerica, someone knelt down and planted a seed on purpose. We call it the agricultural revolution. History books call it humanity's great leap forward. But what if that leap forward was actually a trap? What if the people who lived through it were worse off than the ancestors they replaced? The biologist Jared Diamond once called agriculture the worst mistake in the history of the human race. That's a strange thing to say about the foundation of civilization. So let's look at the evidence. We don't have to guess. We have the receipts, buried in the dirt. Archaeologists have compared skeletons of foragers to skeletons of early farmers from the exact same regions. And the farmers lost badly. Shorter bones, worse teeth, riddled with cavities from starchy grain diets foragers never ate. Marks of malnutrition and anemia stamped into the bone itself. Small, porous lesions in the eye sockets that show up again and again in farming populations and almost never in foraging ones. Let that sink in. The generation that supposedly advanced human civilization was, physically, in significantly worse shape than the generation before it. Some estimates put the average height drop at 3 to 4 inches after the shift to agriculture, a difference so large you could sort forager from farmer skeletons almost every time, shorter, sicker, hungrier, and in some populations it took thousands of years for average height to recover. So what went wrong? Start with dinner. A forager's plate was chaos, in the best possible way. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins famously described foraging societies as the original affluent society, not because they had more stuff, but because they had enough, with time left over. Berries, fish, roots, nuts, shellfish, whatever game wandered within range. Some modern foraging groups eat well over 100 different plant and animal species across a year. Lose one food source, and you had 99 others to fall back on. A farmer's plate was a bet, and a narrow one. Wheat, rice, maize. One crop, sometimes two, carrying the entire caloric weight of an entire village. One drought, one blight, one bad season, and there was nothing left to catch you. This is why famine appears constantly in the historical record once agriculture takes hold, and rarely before it. For early farmers, hunger wasn't an occasional disaster. It was a threat that never fully left the room. Now, the workload. Foragers, by most estimates, spent 15 to 20 hours a week acquiring food. The rest of the week, and this tends to shock people, was rest, socializing, storytelling, tool making. Foraging left room for an actual life. Farming left room for nothing. Clear the land, often by hand. Till the soil. Plant in narrow windows, dictated by the seasons. Weed constantly, or lose the crop. Harvest before the rains ruin everything. Store it, then defend that stored grain. From rot, from rodents, and increasingly from other humans who'd rather take it than grow their own. Some estimates put early farming labor at 50 to 60 hours a week or more. Sun up to sundown, for an entire lifetime, with none of the slack foraging allowed. And then, the diseases showed up. Because farming did something foraging almost never did. It made humans stay in one place. Foragers moved constantly, so infection rarely had time to build up around any one camp. Farmers settled permanently, built walls, stored grain that attracted rodents, and lived within arm's reach of newly domesticated animals. Pigs, cows, chickens, sleeping practically inside the walls of human homes for the first time in our history. That closeness built a bridge, and diseases walked right across it. Measles likely came from a cattle virus. Influenza has deep roots in domesticated birds and pigs. Some of history's deadliest killers began as animal illnesses that jumped into densely packed farming villages and never left. So here's the real question. If farming meant worse food, brutal hours, and entirely new diseases, why didn't we just quit? Because here's the trap, and it's colder than you'd expect. Farming never needed to make any individual life better in order to win. It only needed to produce more calories per acre than foraging ever could. And more calories, reliably, means more children who survive. That's the entire mechanism. Not better lives, more lives. A grain field, even poorly managed, can feed vastly more mouths per square mile than a forest ever could through hunting and gathering. So farming populations exploded, sometimes doubling within a few generations, while every individual inside them got a little shorter, a little sicker, and more exhausted than the foragers before them. Health went down, headcount went up, and headcount, biologically speaking, is what wins. And once a population grows past what the land could ever support through foraging alone, there is no walking it back. You cannot unexplode a population. Those extra children are already born, already hungry. And the only way to feed that many people is more farming, never less. The door only swings one direction. Here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. No one chose this. No farmer 10,000 years ago woke up and thought, you know what sounds like a great deal? Working 3 times as hard, eating a worse diet, and exposing my children to diseases that didn't exist a generation ago, also there will simply be more humans on Earth. Nobody signed up for that trade. Every step made sense in the moment. Plant a little more, feed a few more mouths, because those mouths belong to your own children. And those small, reasonable decisions, repeated across thousands of villages over thousands of years, built a door that only ever opened one way. Some historians go further still. James C. Scott argued that early farming states weren't really about progress. They were about control. Grain stored in one place is easy to tax and easy to seize. Foragers, spread across the land, were nearly impossible to conscript. Farmers, rooted to a granary a ruler could simply walk into, were not. But the truly disturbing part isn't that any of this happened. It's that it was, in a very real sense, unavoidable. A trap built entirely from good, short-term, individually rational decisions, with nobody positioned to see the whole shape of it until it had already closed. And yet, this same trap eventually built everything we now call civilization, cities, writing, invented largely to track grain surpluses and debts, specialized labor, since a surplus could finally support people who didn't grow food themselves, armies, empires. Every major institution in recorded history is, in some sense, stacked on top of that first uneven trade. But that entire tower was built on the backs of generations who were, one by one, shorter, sicker, and worked harder than the ancestors they replaced. So the next time someone shows you that tidy March of Progress image, ape, hunched forager, upright farmer, then us, standing tall, remember the skeletons. Remember that the person at that middle step often paid for it with their health, their labor, and their freedom. Progress, it turns out, was never really about any one person living a better life. Sometimes it's simply about more people existing at all, working, surviving, and quietly paying a price no one individual ever agreed to, until it became the foundation the entire modern world was built on.